Good morning, sir.
I was a teacher in the New York City public school system for 11 years, and I taught in District 13 in Bedford-Stuyvesant. And during those 11 years, I had the opportunity to teach an IGC class. The children in my class were all reading 4 and 5 years above grade level. During that time, they were very far ahead. Unfortunately, all the other classes in the school were reading 4 and 5 years below grade level. The children in my class, who were all African American, could have aced that SHSAT. They would have had no problem whatsoever. Unfortunately, the IGC programs have been greatly cut back in certain areas by the New York City Department of Education over the last 15 years or so. And that seems to be when we got a great disparity in terms of the specialized schools. Brooklyn Tech in the mid-90s did not have the problem that we see now. There were 40 to 45% of children who were African American, Hispanic. They had the IGC programs in their districts. There's a direct correlation between the presence of IGC programs, G&T programs, in districts and the amount of students that are admitted to specialized high schools who do well on the SHSAT. Now, I don't understand why the Department of Education, and I do know what happened in my district. The Department of Education was embarrassed that so many of their classes, so many of the children were reading so far below grade level and doing so far below in math. And yet there was a class, an IGC class, where they were reading way above. We have really, I believe, failed the gifted children throughout our city. The Department of Education has systematically and methodically, not just under your reign as chancellor, but previously under Mayor Bloomberg, they started cutting back, reducing IGC classes, gifted and talented programs. Now, I know you will make the argument that these programs are not as effective, but they were sure effective to the 30 kids in my class back then, and I believe they would be very effective now to children who are performing well, who have the capability of doing it, and I think they would increase the number of those children. I think we have to concentrate on how do we improve the education. We still have a great number of children who are not doing well in New York City school system. There's been improvement. Over the last 10 years, there's been improvement. We need to keep that up. But I think we're abandoning the brightest of all of our children, no matter what district they're in, no matter what country they've come from, no matter what is the color of their skin, their religion, their economic status. I think we've abandoned the brightest of those children, and we failed to give them an opportunity to be able to get the benefit of a specialized high school. I think we need more specialized high schools.
Assemblyman Colton, is there a question?
Yes, there is a question. The question is, why are we not looking at the statistics which showed that the diversity greatly decreased as we greatly decreased the number of gifted and talented programs in New York City?
So, Assemblyman Colton, I want to first thank you for your service as a teacher. Anyone who's actually taught understands the complexities of what happens in a classroom. So I want to thank you. As a fellow teacher, as the chair's been a teacher, we know what a special job that is. I can tell you that in New York City, the New York City students have outperformed their state peers in the English language arts exams now for 3 years in a row. We are outperforming the rest of the students in New York State. We have closed the gap with our peers in state math exams. We have decreased dropout rates. We have increased the graduation rate. We have increased the number of students taking at least one advanced placement exam. Over the last 5 years, we've had an 18% increase in English language arts. We could not, and I could not agree more with your sentiment. You have to concentrate on improving all student performance. And we're doing that. The fact of the matter is that even as we've increased that student performance, you still are seeing an absolute dearth of African American and Latino students that because of a single exam are not provided the opportunity to attend a public school that we call a specialized school, in defiance of every other school system in America that has a specialized school. And we know that from a psychometric perspective. There is no evidence that shows a single test is the most enlightened way to identify opportunity for students. And as we were in classrooms as teachers, we all knew that it wasn't the quiz, it wasn't the test, it was the interaction, it was the being able to demonstrate your subject matter mastery, it was the ability to be able to communicate, it was the ability to academically perform on a number of different facets and fronts that gave us the information to assign then a grade to that student. Yet, for the students that want to go to a specialized school, they just have to take a test that's not aligned to the state standards, that's just a hard test that they have to be tutored for, and we just feel that that's not the most enlightened way of doing it. Now, I can't speak to the history of what happened. I can only speak to the fact that in 1971 there was a state law that was approved to stop looking at the diversity of these particular schools. That is still the status quo. And I can say that the research and the data that we currently have shows that that state law is working very well, and it's excluding certain students in New York City from that opportunity. And I think that's the power of having this conversation, to hear different ideas, to look at the data, and then to determine as a city, do our moral values align with what the data is telling us? But again, I can tell you that the boats are rising. We want to make them rise faster. But at the same time, we have this moral imperative in front of us.
Mr. Chancellor, let me insert my executive privilege here as the chair. I don't know if you possibly answered Mr. Colton's basic question. Do you believe that reinstating gifted and talented programs in all the schools throughout the city would enhance the minority representation in the specialized high schools?
I will answer that question. I'm going to ask Deputy Chancellor Robinson to also add to my answer. The current iteration of gifted and talented would not do that, because even in the identification of gifted and talented students, you have a chasm between Black and Latino students and other subgroups of students and other students that are identified as gifted and talented. So the very disproportionality that we're seeing in admissions to specialized schools, we're seeing the exact disproportionality of students who are identified as gifted and talented. Now, we've also learned a great deal about brain science and early learning and how children learn over just the last 5 years, not to mention over the last 40 years. So we know that gifted and talented in an enriched academic environment is more than just a program. It's about how you structure the learning environment and then how you provide scaffold and support for students to access a much more rigorous course of study. Very specifically, the current iteration of what a gifted and talented program is would not make a difference in that particular issue.
Thank you.
And also just to build upon what the Chancellor has shared, thank you so much, Assemblymember Colton. I'm actually a District 13 baby. I attended public school 305 in District 13. I'd just like to share with you, last year, we had approximately 2,200 Black and Latinx 8th graders who applied for high school, and they had test scores of at least 4.0. That's a very, very high test score. That means that they scored at the very top of the cohort on these tests. Among these students, the 2,200 students, 83% of Black students took the specialized high schools test, and 72% of Latinx students took the specialized high schools test. And only 18% of these black students received an offer, and only 23% of Hispanic students received an offer. So we're talking about the highest scorers of Black and Latinx students, students who would have been gifted and talented in your day as a teacher in District 13, and they are still not being admitted to the specialized high schools. So despite the highly qualified nature of these students, the test prevents them from accessing these schools.
Thank you. Mr. Otis.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chancellor and Deputy Chancellors.